Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Sakina Al-Junaid. Welcome to our webinar organized by Columbia Asia as part of its Health Transformation Program. It has been 3 years since the Health Transformation Program was first launched. In fact, it won a Malaysia Health and Wellness Brand Award in 2019 under the Wellness category. The objective of Columbia Asia's Health Transformation Program is to create a culture of health to make a difference and improve the health of the communities we serve. We believe that hospitals can create a culture of health at the workplace and in any community by offering effective health and wellness programs so individuals can make healthy choices. Through its on-ground and digital events and workshops, this program has benefited countless company employees in improving their health, fitness, and well-being. Okay, and now let's move on to today's wellness webinar by asking you some questions. Okay, that was just an introduction as to the organizer of this webinar. Are you feeling grumpy at the office, yawning incessantly, not particularly productive? Okay, you're probably aware that you're not getting quality sleep, as most of us have experienced. There's more to know regarding how sleep can affect your health, including your moods. So please welcome Dr. Dipesh Chaudhury, the Assistant Professor of Biology at NYU in Abu Dhabi. Dr. Dipesh was born and lived in Malaysia for 10 years before he relocated to the UK. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of London in the UK, and then he has his PhD from the Open University in the UK. He has also held various postdoctoral and associate scientist positions at UCLA in the USA, CNRS in Marseille in France, Cornell University in USA, and Mount Sinai School of Medicine in USA. So his current area of research at NYU Abu Dhabi includes sleep. Without further ado, let's get down to business and discover the science behind a basic human physiological need and how it can directly affect both our mental and physical stress. Please welcome Dr. Dipesh Chaudhury. Hi, Dr. Dipesh.
Hi, Sakina.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Right.
So I can call you Dipesh?
Please do. Yes, I was about to say, please call me Dipesh. No need for formality.
Okay, all right. So that was quite a formal introduction. Actually, I was trying to get everything right because, my goodness, you're such an authority on this topic.
No, you got everything perfectly right. And of course, there's a lot of other people working on this stuff. And I just cover a small part of this.
Being an expert in this field and, whenever you have to do presentations, do you get wisecracks, like sleeping on the job, and all those things? I'm sure you've come across those before.
Yeah, actually, we do. Absolutely. Why do you sleep on the job? Or we work on depression also. They always make jokes about depression.
And I'm sure you must get people who actually happily would volunteer to become subjects of experiment. But I understand that you don't use human beings as subject for your study in sleep.
No, we use an animal model, a mouse model, a rodent model of sleep and stress. And I'll touch on that a little bit at the end of the talk.
Okay, all right. So without further ado, let's go straight into the basic. As an expert in this field, how would you describe sleep? The floor is yours. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sakina. First of all, thank you, Shumi, my cousin who invited me, Sakina, and Elaine, who helped with setting up this thing. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. So I'll give a quick overview, hopefully, on sleep and sort of the benefits of sleep and so on and so forth, and talk a little bit at the end, very basically, some of the stuff we do. So first of all, I guess since we're talking about sleep, we should really define what sleep is, correct? Right? So sleep, if you look up here, I hope you guys can see it, the statement. So this is a definition. So sleep is a readily reversible state of reduced responsiveness to an interaction with the environment, okay? Plus, the need for sleep increases with sleep deprivation. Now, this is looks like a simple statement, but it's important because this differentiates it from being unconscious, right? So sleep is a behavior, okay? So it's not being unconscious, right? It is actually considered a behavior in our field, and the reason why it's not being it's different from unconscious is it's readily reversible, right? You can wake someone up from sleep. It might be hard, but you can wake someone up. And the other important criteria is this: if you deprive someone of sleep, the need for sleep increases, right? Because there's that extra drive. And maybe we'll come back to that. Since I can't see you very clearly, please do stop me if there's anything.
No worries, but I think I would need to ask you to increase the volume of your voice a little bit?
Now, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, just make it clearer.
Okay.
Just a little louder. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. So hopefully you can see in this slide, one of the things
No problem.
one of the things we see is that sleep varies. The duration of sleep varies a lot within the animal kingdom, right? So you have animals that sleep for a long period of time, and then us humans, we sort of moderate, and then you have animals such as herbivores. Typically, with large herbivores, they sleep less, and there's actually an evolutionary reason for that, because they probably an adaptation to survive, right? So they're to escape from predators. They don't sleep that long, but they also wake up much easy whenever they hear any noises. Another thing with sleep, and I just show this, is it seems to be prevalent in all the animal kingdom, and this is very interesting, at least for us, is that it was recently reported that even jellyfish, and this is a very ancient form of jellyfish, these also exhibit traits of sleep. And why this is interesting is that these jellyfish don't actually have a brain as such. They have a network of neurons. They don't have a central brain. So this brings up more of a philosophical question of, is sleep just a sort of a byproduct of having neuronal networks? Okay, we'll come on to that more a little bit more in a bit. So I thought I'll quickly go through sort of the very generally the sort of sleep patterns we see in a human brain. Okay, so how we measure sleep is using EEG. So you can put electrodes on the brain, okay, and then someone goes to sleep. So this would be in a sleep lab, and you can measure the different activity in the brain. So, oops, sorry. Typically, when someone is awake, you have a lot of high frequency activity. Don't worry about the terms here, right? Alpha, beta. All this means is you have high frequency activity in the brain when you're awake. Okay. And then what happens is, as in the evening, you're sort of tired, you go to bed, right? You first go into this quiet phase, this stage 1 non-REM sleep, right? That you spend about a minute or so, 1 minute to 5 minutes in this relaxed period. Your rhythm slowly, the frequency is slowing down, and you'll notice the amplitude of the rhythms also getting bigger. Okay. So the main point is, as you go from stage 1, stage 2, and so on, and you're going through this what we call non-REM sleep. Okay. So there are 4 of these stages, and basically you cycle through, right? You go from stage 1, 2, 3. You have the main difference you see is you start seeing the frequency of your brain activity slowing down, right? Until you get to the stage 4, which is where you get your deep sleep, right? You get this very high frequency, very low frequency, high amplitude rhythm. So basically, this is where you're very relaxed in deep sleep, and then you spend between stage 3 and 4 about 30 minutes to an hour, right? And then what happens is you cycle back up. You go from stage 4 up to stage 1, and then you go to REM sleep. And some of you may have heard of REM sleep. So this is rapid eye movement sleep, right? So this is when you have your basically this is when you have your vivid dreams, typically, right? So here, REM sleep, your brain has activities similar to being awake. That's why when it was first discovered, it was called paradoxical sleep. But basically, this is when you have vivid dreams. Your body is paralyzed because so you don't act out your dreams, right? You naturally stop your arms and legs moving around, okay? But your eyes are flicking around a lot. So this is when you have your REM sleep, and then you spend in the beginning of the night a few minutes, and what you'll notice is REM sleep, the duration of REM sleep increases throughout the night, right? And typically we'll have one of these cycles lasts about 90 minutes. And for an average human being, assuming everything is okay, you'll have about 5 to 6 of these cycles, right? And this is just to show that during REM sleep, you have your increased eye movements, and then other physiological parameters are changing as well throughout your sleep, right? Your heart rate, your respiration. Okay. So that was the basic overview of sleep in humans, and it's essentially similar in animals. And I just put this slide here just to show that even though we all exhibit REM and non-REM sleep, between the animal kingdoms, between different animals, you get this duration of these different states varies. We don't really know why. There's work ongoing right now trying to figure that out, but all this hopefully shows is that even though we have different durations, it seems to be, it's very important for us to have aspects of both non-REM and REM sleep during sleep, for humans and also within the animal kingdom. Okay. Okay, well, different animals have adapted to their niche being, the environment they're in, and how they adapt their sleep to fit in the environment. For example, you have this Arctic sandpiper birds, right? So during mating season, they somehow, and this is very interesting, we don't know what's going on, how it works. Their sleep center switches off essentially. So these male birds, right, basically they stay awake 24 hours a day for several weeks in order to just mate. So they stay awake to fight off other male competitors to optimize their time to find the mate. You also get, for example, in the African savannah, certain deer that only are active during dusk or twilight, sunrise or sunset periods, right? And the rest of the time they're resting or sleeping. So they've adapted, and this is to avoid predators, basically. And then these last two is very interesting to me, is that you get certain creatures, so birds and dolphins, for example. So I'll talk about the frigate bird first. Frigate birds, right? So they spend most of their time overseas, right? Looking for food and just migrating, right? However, they can't land on water because they don't have waterproofing on their feathers. So what they do is they need to constantly fly, right? And what they can, and how they do this is they switch to half their brain goes to sleep while the other half stays awake, right? So they can flip their brain states. And this is the same thing with dolphins. So dolphins are mammals, right? So they need to breathe air, but they live in the sea. So what they do is they can't completely go to sleep because they'll drown. So what happens is, hopefully you can see in this image here, one half goes to sleep while the other half stays awake. So this right hemisphere, for example, is sleeping while the left hemisphere is awake, and then it will switch at some point, and then the other hemisphere will sleep and awake. So you get these kind of very cool adaptations, right, going on.
So different animals, they've got different stages of sleep because of functional reasons.
Correct.
It works to their surroundings and whatnot. But okay, first of all, do all animals sleep? I'm not sure. When you showed the starfish earlier,
jellyfish, yeah.
Okay, so all animals, all creatures, they sleep, but it just differs whether how long they sleep and how they sleep, whether half a brain or.
Absolutely, Sakina. So it's the architecture of sleep is different, but as far as we can tell in the animal kingdom, right? All animals need sleep. Okay, I can't talk about insects. No one's looked at that yet, but that's actually an interesting topic.
Okay.
But as far as we can tell, yes, and it's just the architecture. So actually, this is a good question related to this actually. So this is hopefully trying to show kind of the architecture that we have, right? So, for example, this is a sleep in a cartoon of a human sleep across our lifespan, right? So first thing to take in is that we spend about a third of our lifetime asleep. I think most of you may have heard this fact, right? You see here, for example, in this axis here, this is 24-hour time point, and we see the duration we spend in these different states in a 24-hour period changes as we get older. Okay, so ignore this part here, but from zero, so from conception and then to death, right? What you can hopefully you can notice is we spend more and more time awake as we get older. All right, and and then we see our REM and non-REM states change, right? And this is actually important because I think most of you may have known as like our grandparents, they generally tend to sleep less, right? Assuming that everything is healthy, they tend to wake up earlier, and so on, and maybe sleep later and so on. Okay, but the main point is you see sleep changing as we age. And this is important because, actually, I'll come back to that in a bit, that point. Actually, I want to just talk about why do we sleep, all right? So, and this is a question that, as hopefully I've sort of shown you, we see sleep in all organisms. We don't know why. What is the drive? So there's some hints of multiple aspects of physiology that are needed to function properly. We in order for them to function properly, we need sleep. So, for example, one reason we think we need sleep is for energy conservation, and there's still this debate going on. But we see, for example, Small mammals, right? They sleep a lot. If you look in this correlation graph here, smaller the animals on the left graph here, the longer they sleep, whereas the bigger that they sleep less. And this is for herbivores, so for plant eaters. So one reason may be that these smaller animals, they have a larger surface area to body volume, right? They have a high metabolic rate, they lose more heat. So by sleeping, right, they basically lower their metabolism, okay? So in related to that, so when you sleep, you reduce all these factors, right? If these are elevated for long term, this can be unhealthy, and I'll touch on that in a bit. So energy conservation is one. Another piece of evidence is that sleep is important to remove toxins from our body and brain.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, there was a piece of this is a cartoon of a mouse brain, because the study was done here in mouse. But the idea is that when we sleep, the fluid in our brain that bathes our cells with oxygen and nutrients, in addition to doing that, it also removes toxins. And what's been shown is when we sleep, or at least in the animal studies, the flow of these toxins out of the brain, removing the fluid with the toxins out of the brain, is increased. So one idea is when you're resting, when you're sleeping, is removing these toxins, right? Which, if they accumulate, will be harmful for your brain. And I'll come to that in a bit as well. Okay. And related with that also, it's sleeping has been shown to help in repair, especially during development. So, for example, even in adult studies, right, when you sleep, if you've got injury, that helps with it. It activates certain processes that are important in repairing damaged tissue, right? For children, of course, is very important. This is why kids, for example, sleep for a long time, because we have growth hormone release, right? These hormones that trigger development of tissue in a child, these are released more when the child is sleeping, okay? And this I'll touch more on later. We see that, when people are not sleeping properly, you have certain risk of these diseases, which I'll touch on more in the slides, okay? And finally, another important piece of evidence showing why sleep is important is for memory formation, memory consolidation, or brain development, okay?
I see.
Yeah. So, for example, sleep has been shown, and there's a lot of accumulating animal data now, and there's some work going on in humans, but it's still not quite clear in human work yet. But what we think is that when we learn something, so for example, a mouse has learned to do a task, right? When they've recorded in their brain activity happening while it's learning a task, what they found is when that animal is sleeping, those same brain regions are reactivating, almost replaying what they learned. And what is believed to happen is when they're sleeping, and during the certain stages of sleep, and we think REM sleep is the big player here, is strengthening connections in the brain that are important for that memory that thing that they've learned, right? And we think for humans it's the same thing. So getting good night's sleep in terms of just having good cognitive processes going on is important, right? And again, we see this.
So basically, you're saying that if we don't get enough sleep, then we become forgetful?
Absolutely. So there's already a lot of anecdotal evidence. I'm sure you and people watching this may have come across it yourself. Right? If you're not you're tired, that so you're feeling tired. That affects your ability to focus. But apart from that, even before you wake up and be tired, the things that happen in your brain that strengthen connections, right? They're not happening as well. So you basically forget much easier as well.
Okay. On the extreme side, doctor, does this also cause Alzheimer's?
That's a great question. And I'll touch on that maybe, but yeah, I can say it now. So there is evidence of sleep affecting Alzheimer's. It's more of this cause and consequence, right? So, for example, people have seen patients with Alzheimer's, right? One of the areas of the brain that is affected is this frontal cortical area.
Right. Yeah.
That affects the ability that's important for higher cognitive processes, right? That area is also important for sleep. Okay. So when you get pathology of these cells in the frontal cortical areas are damaged, that also, since it plays a role in sleep, that is also affected. But now the studies coming up showing that there's already abnormalities, or maybe abnormalities in sleep that may lead, if you're not sleeping properly, may increase the chances of getting Alzheimer's. And that's really interesting, because if if that is the case, at least then you can maybe potentially use this as a diagnostic tool, and also maybe as a way of preventing, if you know these abnormalities in sleep is happening in this region of the brain, or in this region of the brain, abnormalities in sleep, then maybe you can develop therapeutics to sort of prevent Alzheimer's coming. So that's something that people are looking at right now. But yeah.
Okay.
So,
but it's not directly, I mean, there's no proof that it directly causes Alzheimer's. It's just that if you have bad sleeping patterns, and then chances are it puts you at risk.
Well, this is the evidence so far. This is still ongoing work. So the evidence shows that it may lead to Alzheimer's, but science being science, we need a lot of evidence, right? So the evidence there's some evidence pointing in that direction, but we don't have concrete enough data to show that definitely there is this correlation. Okay? Is that clear, Sakina? Hello? Oh.
Yep, that's fine. I can hear you.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So that's the three main reasons. Now I want to talk a little bit about, things that can go wrong when we don't get sleep, right? But before this is related to that. So I mentioned, how in the few slides earlier, sleep architecture changes as we get older, right? But this has also important sort of societal effects, right? For example, in this case, for adolescent kids. So I've highlighted I've got this table here. It came from a relatively recent paper. What you'll notice, first of all, yes, newborns, they sleep the longest, and then, as we get older, we sleep less, but still, adolescent children, school-age children, they still sleep, need more sleep than, so for example, we do. However, one thing we notice is at puberty, right? And this has been shown across different studies across the world. At puberty, most adolescents experience what we call a late sleep onset, essentially phase delay. What does that mean? Basically, the internal clock, right? This clock in our brain that is related with triggering sleep or triggering wakefulness, right? That clock is delayed by about 2 hours on average, okay? So it shifts. So what does that mean? It means essentially that generally, and for those of you who have teenage kids, and I'm seeing this with my daughter right now, that they don't want to sleep. They can't typically fall asleep at 9, 10. They could when they were this age here, the preschoolers, or even earlier. But what you'll notice is that their clock is shifted, and they actually the signals to trigger sleep comes on much later. So they start feeling sleepy typically right around 11 p.m. I mean, not exactly 11, right, but around this time window. But we know, right, that they need to sleep till 8 to 10 hours or 9 to 11 hours, right, between 9 11 hours. So ideally, right, if they're going to sleep this late, they want to wake up 8 a.m. earliest, or 8 a.m. or even later, right? So in order just to get their proper 9 10 hours sleep, right? But this is a problem because around the world, most schools, right, start around actually some schools 7, 8, right? So these kids are not getting enough sleep, right? So for example, this one study showed that about 70%, which is a huge number, right, of adolescents don't get enough sleep during the school night, right? And this is due to this going to bed late because their clock is just shifted, right? But then they're made to wake up early. And as we touched on earlier with Sakina talking that not being able to sleep affects your ability to concentrate. So first of all, just the ability to concentrate and learn in school is affected, right? But other factors also are negatively impacted. So for example, these things, the increased, and these are different studies have shown this, right? Risk-taking behaviors are elevated, right? So older kids who are driving, they're going to do stupid stuff. I mean, that's also part of being an adolescent, I suppose. But you get aggression affected, unhealthy behaviors such as drinking, smoking, so on.
Dipesh, I think the last time we spoke, you mentioned that there's a country that their students start school later, and not like any other country that actually starts about 7 or 8.
Yes, so
this is the cause for it.
Right. So I mean, first of all, governments have known about this for a while, but some governments, because their scientists have told them, right? But some countries, schools in Denmark, but I think in Europe, the other schools are also thinking of changing this. So they're starting their school times later. So not too late. So instead of 8, I think they're starting their schools around 9 or a little bit after 9, right? So this at least
9 is not too bad.
Yeah, 9 is not too bad. It's just that normally schools
it's not too bad at all. Yeah.
So and this actually may be also good for the parents, right? They don't have to get up so early, maybe. But yeah, so they're taking this into account actually. So and hopefully this is something that will be developed or taken on board around the world. Also, we see this, and this is something I'll touch on a bit later quickly. We also see now in kids, right? These depressive symptoms of elevated actually in these teenagers where they don't get sleep, where the sleep is affected. Okay. All right. Now, a little bit of other sort of peripheral sort of effects you see in other parts of your body, right? So coronary heart disease, as I've also mentioned, is strongly related with lack of sleep. So one study, for example, found that you get increased calcium deposits in your blood vessels, right? This then leads to narrowing of your blood vessels, which then leads to increased blood pressure, right? Another way your blood pressure is increased is with this activation of your sympathetic nervous system. All that is this is part of your flight or fright system in your body, right? So this is naturally when you're stressed or you see out of a lion or something, this or it triggers your body, ready to basically fight or run away, right? And for that to happen, it increases, for example, stress hormone levels in your body, right? Which is good when it's there in short bursts. But the problem is when you don't sleep enough, these levels are elevated, right? And one of the things it does, okay, it actually puts stress on your heart, right? Your heart's pumping a little bit, always higher than it should be all the time. But it also leads to constriction of your blood vessels. So normally what happens is in the fight or flight situation, your blood vessels to your muscles are expanded, so you get more blood to your muscles, so it allows you to run away or to fight. But then it constricts blood vessels in other areas, right? In order to give more blood to your periphery, to your muscles. The problem is if you get this constriction for a long time, this increases blood pressure, and this can then lead to, of course, issues with the heart disease. Okay, so that's one thing. Diabetes is another issue. So, for example, and I'm put this up. I'm looking forward to coming home in summer, have some food. Right. When you eat, typically, whenever we eat, you get increased glucose, right? Blood glucose level. So your sugar goes up. What happens is that triggers basically pancreas to release insulin. Insulin then tells your cells, right? All the cells in your body, okay, take in the glucose, right? You don't want too much glucose hanging around in your blood because that's bad for you, okay? Because that can have other toxic effects. Now, what happens is when you, and this is again, a couple of studies have shown this, when you don't sleep enough, two different pathways are affected, okay? One is, for some reason, we don't know the mechanisms yet, insulin is the pancreas is not so sensitive to the increased glucose level, so it doesn't make or release enough insulin. That's one. Another thing is, even if insulin is released, the cells, right, don't respond to the insulin, so they don't take up the glucose, right? So basically, the net effect is you get elevated glucose level, and this can lead to, for example, type 2 diabetes, right? And this is not good. So this is some evidence. Another evidence is obesity, right? For example, when you eat, right? So you get this hormone, again, don't worry about the details so much. Leptin, this is a hormone that basically triggers, after you've eaten, this is released from your fat cells in your body. This then activates certain areas in your brain that then triggers other brain regions that basically gives you the sensation of fullness, right? You're full and you stop eating, all right? Conversely, when you're hungry, you get this other hormone called ghrelin, okay? This is released from your stomach, all right? So when your stomach is not full, it triggers some cells to release ghrelin. This also then goes around your bloodstream, activates certain brain regions, and it triggers the sensation of hunger, right? So there's this interplay between these two hormones. Now, again, studies have shown when people have been sleep deprived, and also animal studies have shown that when animals have been sleep deprived, you get the leptin levels go down. So leptin tells you when you're full, right? And ghrelin, but then ghrelin levels goes up. So these are the hormones that tell you that you're hungry. So what happens is it tricks your brain and then basically activates your brain regions that makes you go overeat, right? And of course, you overeat, you gain weight. Okay. And related to this, also, we know brain regions that regulate decision making, right? Right. When you don't sleep, their functioning is also affected. We don't know if it's related with the hormone levels, but other studies have shown that the prefrontal cortical area, so this is this area here, which is also affected in Alzheimer's disease. This area is important in decision making, right? The activity of these brain regions are decreased when you're sleep deprived. Okay. Whereas areas involved with sort of reward-seeking behavior, so these are in your midbrain area, so this would be around this part of your brain, right? These areas go funky if you have problems with addiction, for example, right? So you get decreased activity in areas that are important in brain regions, important in proper decision making. Areas that are involved in just seeking reward, right? Those activity in those areas go up, and what happens is again you get this. You just want to get that fix, right? So you overeat, gain weight. So these are two different processes that are affected that lead to obesity. Okay. Fertility, that's another area that's affected, right? And for example, so this could be
a lot of areas. I thought, this is all encompassing. Basically, everything ties back to quality sleep, which is something I think a lot of people are not aware of this.
Absolutely. So this what we see, as I was saying in slides earlier, sleep seems to be important. We really don't know. It doesn't seem like people before thought is it the one or two things that sleep is important for. It seems now that sleep is it touches on so many different things, right? That's why sleep is very important. And I'll come to why we are messing up with sleep now because of our modern lifestyle, right? But yeah, it's all encompassing. We don't actually, and this is why likely you see sleep, within the all animals that we know so far, right? They sleep, right? So it's a very important process for normal, healthy well-being, I suppose, right? So yeah, fertility is affected, for example. So in males, testosterone levels have gone down. In females, this hormone here, which is important for ovulation, is decreased. Okay. And this actually would be sort of relevant for us now during COVID times, right? So this is a study done from Chicago, done in Chicago, University of Chicago, where basically this is human studies. They had subjects who were sleep deprived and subjects who had normal sleep. They gave them vaccines for flu shots, and what they found essentially, those sleep deprived patients, right, had 50% less of an immune antibody response. Okay, so basically, when you give a vaccine, you trigger their natural immune response, right? So if they ever are exposed to flu or in our case COVID, hopefully our body fights against it, right? So this is critical. Now, right now, maybe one thing we need to ensure is that people who are taking the vaccine, right, they need to maybe get a good night's sleep a few days before they go and get vaccinated, right, in order to trigger your immune system.
But I think I'm not wrong to say that to a lot of people, if they can get 6 hours of sleep a night, that's like the best thing that they can ever do, because 8 hours is ideal. Is that correct?
Typically, on average, for most adults, 8 hours is that's the party line, but that's the evidence. Yeah, 8 hours, right? 7 to 8 hours is good, but unfortunately, a lot of us.
But that's not across the board. That's not across the board, though. I mean, it depends on whether you're a man or a woman. It depends on your age. So it tends to differ from one person to the next.
Yes, I mean that in biology there's always a broad range, right?
Yeah, of course.
Typically, it's we can say 7-8 hours. But for example, for 99% of people, 4 hours is not continuous 4 hours is for anyone is not good, right? There are some people, and I won't talk about that so much here, but there are certain genetic mutations in our population where people are called. They're either called night owls or larks. So night owls are people who just can't sleep. So that's not duration. Their times of going to sleep and waking up is shifted. Okay, but the duration actually is still pretty much same. So yeah, so 7 to 8 hours.
What about you? How many hours do you sleep?
That's a good question, actually. So I don't. I'm saying all this. I don't even follow my own. Unfortunately, because of different things, and I'm actually as I get older, I do feel sleepier in the evening, but But I don't know if it's something having grown up in boarding school. I'm like, I don't want to miss out on something. So I want to stay up in case there's something interesting happening.
And you did mention much earlier just now about how there's an there's a biological clock that if you are so used to sleeping at a certain time, and then automatically you'll be sleepy at that time, and you possibly will wake up around the same time as well. So it's all a matter of habit, I suppose.
Yes, that is absolutely right. So habit is one thing which is important actually to keep, but then try to keep a habit where you're not shifting your sleep cycle too much, right? But it's a combination of your own biological rhythm, your natural clock, and then just how your habit with sleep and waking. And I put this here again. I'm not going to spend long on this slide, just to show, for example, there's a lot of people around the world suffer from sleep apnea, which is basically this is the most typical one, obstructive sleep apnea, right? Basically, you have loose tissues in your throat, they relax too much, they blocks your airways, so you wake up. So what happens is, and then the central sleep apnea, same thing, but basically the main point is you don't have a consolidated sleep, right? So remember when I showed you have the non-REM, REM sleep, right? So when you have sleep apnea, you're breaking up that cycle, right? So you have this, you're not having that 5 to 6 cycles of 90 minutes of going between non-REM and REM, right? What happens is when you wake up in the middle of the night, you're breaking that cycle. And it's not like then you just make up, right? Say you're asleep, you have this apnea, and then instead of going from non-REM 3 to 4, then you wake up, and then when you go back to sleep, it's not like you just go from 3 to 4. What happens is you start back from the beginning, so you're not going through the cycle properly, right? And as we've shown so far, right, you need this proper cycling of sleep, it seems, right, in order for your body to function properly. We don't know the mechanisms, right, but there's all this correlative data showing that you don't sleep properly, you have all these like negative stuff, right? So sleep apnea, for example, is something, it's big in sleep research, right, and people are trying to figure out what's going on. But as we've shown, if you don't sleep, you have all these pathologies, and these are the problems that patients with sleep apnea can have, for example. And you can look at this yourself later, but this is we touched on some of these things. There's so many issues that patients from sleep apnea can suffer from. Okay, so that was just sort of going about some basic sort of negative impacts of not sleeping properly. Now I'm going to just change gears a little bit and talk about sleep, the link between sleep and mood disorders, right? And this is something we are working on in our lab.
Yeah, this should be interesting.
So well, it's interesting for me. So why are we interested in this major mood disorders, right? Okay, so according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, right? They came up with a study 2013 showing that major depressive disorders is projected to be like a leading contributor to the global burden of disease, right? They're projecting about 20% of the population are going to suffer from some sort of mood disorders. It's a huge number. And just from the financial point of view, an article came out from The Guardian just a couple of years ago showing that there's about $1 trillion a year lost in productivity with people suffering from mood disorders. They can't contribute to their community, right? But it has can have a lot of impacts within the community, right? And what's the reason you get this increase in this mood disorder? So one idea is, and there's evidence building up showing this, is that from modern lifestyle. So I've used this fancy term. Don't worry. Sometimes scientists like to use these fancy terms, the big terms. But all this means is Zeitgeber is German for time giver. Okay. So it seems like our modern lifestyle is affecting our ability to sleep, which may be affecting our mood, right? For example, people are, in the developed world at least, right? Stress, work stress is a thing that affects sleep. Okay. Another thing is light. We're exposed to more light than we typically should be, right? We evolve, right? Our brain biology evolved to respond to light for humans. We are diurnal animals, right? So we wake in the light time to stay awake in the night, and then we don't have light at night, right? And you see this in communities in the jungles or hunter-gatherer societies, the few that we still have around the world, studies have been done. They go to sleep around, their biology is they start getting their signal to go to sleep around 8 8 o'clock at night, 7, 8 o'clock at night. All right. And they wake up super early. This is how our forefathers and mothers, survived. Right. This is our cycle. Now we're staying up later because we are pushing our systems later because we have, for example,
yeah, that's true. And for some people, they actually that's when they start looking at their phones, just before they fall asleep. And that light apparently is not good if you want to relax.
Absolutely.
What
And I was
I heard, something along those lines.
No, because and now we know the biology behind it. So because of we are watching TV late, watching our phones at night, we are exposed to this beautiful satellite map, right? We see this is at night. We are exposed to the light a lot. We're also, although now COVID times we're not traveling as much, more people are now suffering from jet lag. That also impacts our brain cycle. And why does it do that? So now we know the biology behind it, and it's a relatively recent discovery. We have, in fact, what is interesting, receptors in our eye, which are not image forming. So everyone's heard of rods and cones, the receptors in our retina that allows us to see. Okay, but then there are also other receptors in our eye that are these non-image forming receptors. They respond to light, and particularly blue wavelength light, actually, right? Which is important because this is the wavelength that you get on your phones and your monitors, right? So you're triggering, when you look at your phone at night, you're triggering these receptors a lot, okay? And what happens is when these receptors are triggered, they reset your sleep-wake cycle, right? But they also send projections to regions of the brain that play with mood and emotion and all these other things. So you're basically over-activating these regions when they typically would not be as active, okay? There's a lot of work going into understanding the mechanisms now. It's still a lot of it is still unknown, right? But some exciting work being done to understand, how is this extra overstimulation of these receptors at night triggering all these things? Because we see effects with mood, and we also see behavioral effects with animal studies where we can really control the environment, where we can affect their mood, okay? And also the ability to learn and remember stuff, for example. So one way I think you see now with phone companies, you have the option, if I recall correctly, you can dim you can remove the blue light, right? So you can so hopefully stimulate less, or don't overstimulate these receptors in your eye. Okay. These are the receptors in your eye that actually allow you to naturally entrain, right? Every day. When we wake up, we see the light, our clock is reset for that environment we're in, okay? Why do we have jet lag? When you travel somewhere in the world, right? Then now you're getting light at a different time, right? So that affects the input to this rhythm in your brain, okay? And when there's like desynchrony between the rhythm that is set by light and then the change in light input, that affects the natural rhythm in your process in your brain, which then leads to jet lag. I won't go into too much detail. If anyone has any questions related to that, I'll have to talk about it more later.
Yeah. Well, we've got some questions already, Doctor, but it's okay. I think we'll just finish the slides first, and then we can address the questions later.
Okay, I'll just quickly zap through so I have more time. I think this is just to show that, there's a lot of studies now coming up, and this is one example where depression, for example, you see correlation with depression and abnormalities in sleep. So this is again a normal patient. There's a normal profile you'll see in sleep where you have different stages of non-REM sleep, and you can see as the night goes on, the pinkier the REM sleep amount goes up. Okay, this is a normal pattern. Like the duration of REM increases throughout the night. Okay, this is a patient with depression, and the main take-home message here is you see that the pink, right, the amount of REM is completely different. So you don't get the increase of REM, so the latency or the duration is shorter, and also you don't get as much of the stage 4 sleep. Okay, main take-home point is with depression, your architecture of your sleep is all disrupted. Okay, so this is some evidence we see. Another evidence, and this is very counterintuitive and goes against everything else I've just said. Sleep deprivation has been shown to be good. Still a lot of work that needs to be done, right? But sleep deprivation has been shown to be able to alleviate depression in about 60% of patients, right? In the 2 studies that were done, okay? However, the problem is, as soon as they take a nap, right, they report feeling bad again. We don't know what's going on this work, but they show there's some interaction between sleep and mood, right? And what we think is maybe sleep depriving is resets the sort of abnormal clock in the brain. But the problem is we can't sleep deprive someone for a long period of time because, as we've said, like there's other health concerns that start coming up, right? And you can die, right? So if you can understand the mechanism, maybe we can then directly target by pharmacology or something, pathways that are reset with sleep deprivation without actually making the person sleep deprived, right? And then maybe treat depression like that. Okay, so this is like one chronotherapeutics is something now people are using sleep deprivation or sleep deprivation with antidepressant medication to treat for depression. That's still
Are we
sort
looking
of
at treatment? Is this a treatment for if you would like to sleep better? Chronotherapeutics, is that what it is?
This is not even to sleep better. This is actually to treat for depression. So this is still very controversial. So what they're doing is they're depriving people of sleep, and what they found is that they report feeling better by depriving them of sleep. So it's very counterintuitive. But the problem is you can't do this for long term because, as I mentioned, then you start having all these other negative effects of depriving someone of sleep. Okay. So what people are doing is maybe either depriving them for a little bit, but combining it with medication. But again, this is still not an ideal treatment. People have shown that it works, but you can't do it long term. Okay. So I'm going to just wrap up here now and say that we do some in our lab. We measure sleep in the rodent brain. Okay, we can measure the non-REM and REM sleep. And what we do is what we're interested in understanding how is sleep affected in mice that have been exposed to stress. Right here are mice, they get attacked by another mouse, right? And then some of these mice are resilient to stress, like in our human population, right? We know there are biological differences, physiological differences in these 2 different subtypes of mice. They're the same strain, but like in a human population, you get some that can handle the stress better and some that they cannot, okay? Stress resilient, stress susceptible. So what we did is we measured sleep architecture in these mice before and after exposure to stress. Okay, before we didn't know if they were going to be resilient and susceptible. But anyway, we measured sleep architecture. So we measured REM and non-REM sleep in this mice brain, okay? And what we found was very interesting. Those mice, right? So this is my little bit of animation, right? That are susceptible to susceptible to stress prior to stress, right? So we saw these abnormalities after stress, but when we looked at the data before they were exposed to stress, they already exhibited this abnormal insomnia-like sleep behavior in their brain, okay? Basically, when you're sleeping, you're switching between wake, non-REM, and REM, right? What we found is in the mice that didn't handle stress well, right, that they switch very quickly between the wake state and the non-REM state, right? So it's like insomnia. Insomnia, you go to sleep a bit, you wake up. You're not having the consolidated sleep, okay? So this is very exciting for us because now maybe we're doing more work in this to try and understand. These are markers that we can use in the human population, maybe to predict if someone can be more susceptible to stress or not, okay? And then also try and develop, hopefully understand the mechanisms to develop treatments. Okay, last 2 bits of slides, all right? I'll go quickly through.
No worries, don't rush. We're good.
And I think that's what people would really want to know, right? What kind of things do we need to do to get a good night's sleep, right? And I think we all could, follow this advice, hopefully, at least some of it. And I think, Sakina, you touched on this a bit earlier, getting a regular sleep schedule, right? So this basically, try to get into a routine where you go, okay, you don't have to go to bed at 7 or 8, obviously, but go 10 or something. But if you have a routine, right, and then hopefully not have to wake up at 4 in the morning, but whatever normal time is. But try to get your, pack in 7 to 8 hours of sleep if possible, right? So have your routine. And I say this, and I do this myself, right? You're not getting enough sleep. You think, okay, I'm not going to get my 8 hours, 7 hours, whatever in the weekend and the weekday, and then I just sleep longer in the weekend. Well, that doesn't actually work, okay? You're just like, packing in all the non-REM and REM sleep in the weekend, right? That just doesn't, your biology doesn't deal with that well, okay?
Okay, so sleep cannot be replaced.
No, you need to follow, and I keep playing with that. It needs to go through that proper cycle, that 6 to 7 or whatever cycles of the different stages, right? If you don't get it properly in one sleep setting, it's not like you just make up for it in the weekend. It's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay? Exercise, I think, doing exercise tires you out, right? So you can get a bit tired at night, you can go to sleep. That's one thing. But also it's been shown generally, because you're tired, maybe the quality of your sleep, again, this is your architecture of your sleep, is more robust, it's consolidated. So you go through, it's been shown, you go through all the different stages. Relax before bed. I mean, so some of these look it seem very obvious, right? But now there's sort of some science and biology behind it. We can understand, for example, why relax. It decreases your stress hormone levels, your cortisol levels. So this is like your fight and flight system, right? If your stress hormone level is up, it's going to ramp up the rest of your system. Like it's going to basically shut down the sleep. It's going to shut down the sleep promoting regions of your brain and ramp up the wake promoting. So try and relax, and that will naturally like ramp down your body. Same with that. Related with that is, and I know for sure this is for me, having a hot shower before bed, right? When you come out of hot shower, your body temperature just goes from hot to cold. That actually increases the sleepiness. Probably because as your body temperature goes down, it does activate, and we know this actually in the regions that trigger sleepiness. Those brain regions actually do go, activity in those regions do go up. The connection we don't know yet, but we've seen that. Okay. Exposure to natural morning light. This is related with the circadian, this clock in our brain. I mentioned that from the eye to the brain, right?
Yeah.
And this may seem counterintuitive, right? You want to go to sleep at night. Why make sure you get? So this is again with the jet lag thing I mentioned. Our brains, our internal clock is reset by the light we see in the daytime. Okay, for generally. So then that resets that rhythm, and then so by having good, strong natural light, because that has all the wavelengths that can stimulate, especially the blue wavelengths that can stimulate those receptors in your retina, right? It sets that clock, and then the clock will then run on its own rhythm, right? Which will then mean that it will trigger melatonin release, for example. That will then tell your brain, okay, start going to sleep in the evening. So basically, it's a good clock resetting system, right? So exposure to morning light is a good thing if possible. And I think in Malaysia we get a lot of good sunlight, so generally, so it should not be a problem.
What about in Abu Dhabi? Is there enough sunlight there?
Oh yeah, we get a lot of sunlight. So so here also not so much of a problem.
Good to know.
So yeah, if anyone wants to come and please visit me, and I'll you get a lot of sunlight here as well. Although don't come in, it's too hot. Okay, now wrapping up then, things to avoid. And again, most of you would have heard of this, right? So caffeine and nicotine, these are stimulants, right? Caffeine effects can, of course, it varies between people, right? 8 hours after ingestion, right? Another thing, actually, this is a relatively recent thing. Caffeine also blocks receptors in your brain that are triggered by a signal that we just found, not where other people have found. As you stay awake longer, there's a release of a chemical, right? That is part of as that concentration of that chemical increases, that activates your sleep centers of your brain, right? When you have caffeine, that's blocking that signal. So that might be one of the reasons why caffeine stops at least some people from sleeping, because it's blocking that signal. Nicotine from cigarette smoke, that's also a stimulant, right? That affects sleep. Drinking before going to bed, sometimes people, myself included, think, oh, I'll have a nightcap. Well, it's been shown that affects REM sleep, but also just non-REM sleep. But REM sleep has been affected particularly by alcoholic drinks at night, late at night. Large meals at night, again, indigestion, that will affect your sleep. This is another interesting thing, I think. People miss it. Naps, yes, take naps, but I think, again, varies between people. Naps after 3 p.m. A couple of studies have said this, right? 3, 4 p.m. Because it affects your ability to go to sleep. So because you're taking a nap, it shifts your internal clock again, or you can, right? So you probably go to sleep later than you would if you didn't take a nap, right? And then opposite to having, bright light in the daytime, don't have bright lights at night, because that will then just reactivate and reset your clock. So it will then, your clock will be running like this. You give a bright light, it's going to shift its rhythm. the rhythm of the clock that's going to affect and shift this sleep cycle. Okay, so sorry it took longer than I anticipated.
No worries, it's okay. It's okay. It was a very comprehensive presentation.
But
so we're ready to take on questions from the floor. We've got one question here. Okay, let's go with the first one. Miss SP Yan. Hi, doctor. May I know if someone only sleeps like 3 hours a day and it has been like this for years, is it normal? And oh, my eyesight's going. Is it normal? And what is the reason, or what made them cannot sleep more? Possible lacking some kind of nutrition in the body?
Okay, so if someone only sleeps 3 hours a day,
yeah.
Oh, so they can get away
I guess
with
if you can survive, if you can survive with very little sleep, what's the reason for that? Yeah.
Some people can. The problem is, okay, so first of all, most people, when they're just restricted to these 3 hours, right, if they don't normally, they suffer from a lot of other medical conditions. For example, what I mentioned. Some people, they can. So great question. We don't know, as I hope I'm impressed, we don't know a lot of the biology is going on. So there's a lot of like stuff there that we need to figure out. It seems first of all that the internal clock, right, is quick. It has a very quick clock, so it cycles very quickly. So they don't need sleep, and because these clocks are very quick, it seems like the downstream targets are adapted to this rapid clock system. But you know, but that means basically the immune system, the cardiovascular system, all the systems seem to deal fine with it. They don't seem to have any negative, as far as we know, negative effect. But the mechanisms, we don't know. But we know there are people whose clocks are very quick and they seem to survive well. Their cognitive abilities, the physical, as far as we can tell, they might have underlying issues which we've not detected yet, right? So, yeah, but thank you for that question. That was cool. But sorry, we don't really know.
It's okay. Well, we've got quite a few other questions that are coming in slowly but surely. Okay. Actually, the first question that we had just now, Mr. Jaspuvan Singh. Many working adults are proud when they can go days without much sleep. What's your advice? Actually, I also work. If they're not working, they're playing computer games, and they can go days without much sleep. I know.
Proud. That you shouldn't be too proud of that, man. Because, for example, and this is also alluded to. I don't know if any of you read the book "Why We Sleep" by Walker. He alludes to this. For example, you know, who did he say? Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. They were proud of only having, I think, actually, it might have been 4 hours of whatever sleep a day. But both of them also had Alzheimer's disease, right? So going back to Sakina, your question, right, of Alzheimer's and not sleeping properly. So that's one example. Okay, this is anecdotal, but because, you know, you might not see an effect in a few months or what have you, but the data that I showed, some of them, okay, were quite acute. Within a few weeks, people saw effects, but sometimes, you know, you're not sleeping, you know, it's not like you're not sleeping, you're only sleeping 3 hours a day, but say you're sleeping 6 hours all the time, you could have chronic effects. So these things can appear much later in life, right? I mean, we don't know, there's so many other interacting factors. So yeah, I don't know how, you know, being proud, you should try and, you know, and again, I also need to follow my own advice, right? I don't do it. It's hard, you know, life gets in the way, right? But,
so don't take things for granted, because if you feel okay a few days, but that doesn't mean that things are okay, because it might accumulate. That's what you're saying, right, doctor?
Yeah. Basically, it's a chronic thing, right? You get this chronic effect. So yeah, just because you feel fine 1 week, you know, it doesn't mean. So, for example, sorry, I'll just go with this. And you know, the immune system. I don't know if I touched on that. That's affected with the lack of sleep. There's now evidence coming out now with the increased propensity to cancer, right? Breast cancer, so I forget this, various other types of different aspects of cancers. They're more prevalent in people who've done shift work, for example. So now governments some governments have started actually compensating people if they've worked in a field where they've got this sleep deprived situations, right? And they've got cancer, they can prove it. Governments are now compensating them. These are long-term effect, 20 years later sort of thing. Right?
Okay, so let's get to the next question. Here's one by Miss Yoga, Miss Sadurai. Why do we need less sleep as we get older? Are we still effective? You're quick through that interesting slide on sleeping less as we get older.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question as well.
Yeah.
So why? There's no hard evidence yet showing, what is the biology behind it. One reason could be you are less active generally, right? So your metabolism goes down, slows down as you get older, typically, right? Which is one reason why people can put on weight more, right? Because, compared to when they're in their teenage years or what have you. But so your metabolism goes down. So you need to, you're repairing your body, right? You don't, because if higher the metabolism, there's more, damage can be potentially happening. So your body's, your system's like repairing itself more. Whereas your metabolism's lower, so you're just not using the system as much. So you're not as tired as much. So the triggers for sleep are not as activated, right? That's probably part of the reason we don't. I mean, this is something people are trying to see this connection, but there's not been any hard sort of, at least experimental data showing this. But that's one of the reasons we think, right? And then, as I said, the biological, the circadian clock. I didn't again talk too much about that. That is part of the system that drives sleep. We know that changes during puberty, right? But we also know with age, and these are sort of with age, there are a lot of genetic changes that can happen. The clock in our brain, that's driven by sort of like a feedback loop on gene expression of certain clock genes, we call them, that drive this rhythm. The mutations can affect the genes that are expressed that drive the circadian clock with age. So when that is affected, that the circadian clock is affected, so the drive for sleep or the signal for sleep is also affected. Okay, so that's, yeah.
Okay, next question. Ms. Four Eyes asking, many people say that they are a morning or a night person. What determines that?
Right, so that's with actually great question again. It's so yeah, we call them like the larks or owls. So you get some. So the extreme cases, we know there are mutations actually in their circadian clock, for example. So there are various proteins that drive this rhythmic cycle in this particular clock region of the brain, in the hypothalamus. Because it's a feedback loop system. When you have a mutation in one of the proteins in this clock, right, that either speeds up the clock or slows down the clock. Okay. And by speeding up or slowing down, that can either make you wake up earlier or go to sleep later. Okay. Similar kind of principle as to that teenagers, right? When you see this phase delay, because it's like the proteins that drive that clock are the protein expression of certain proteins in the clock are changed during puberty. Same thing with, you get some mutations in people who this rhythm is affected.
Okay, let's take a question. I'm sorry?
No, I said, for example, there's also other regions that are related with promoting sleep or promoting wakefulness. The activity of the neurons could be affected. So there's many interacting processes. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, no worries. Okay, let's take another question. This is by Vidya Sinapu. What is the ideal sleep hours for adults to be active or productive the next day?
Yeah, so typically the studies have shown 7 to 8 hours is the general duration, they say. So these are various longitudinal studies, various studies around the world where they've just done relatively simple studies, efficiency in doing various tasks, and it seems on average, again, it's on average, 7 to 8 hours seems to be the ideal for most people.
Okay. All right. We need to wrap up in about 5 minutes, so I will just go through the questions very quickly. If possible, let's just try to give a brief answer so that we don't miss out on anyone's questions. Okay. Why is asking, other than mood reset, can daytime naps replace the other detrimental effects of lost night sleep?
Can daytime naps replace other? Sort of to some degree, right? So assuming you've had normal sleep, but then taking naps, not so late in the day, okay, but earlier in the day, several hours before you go to sleep, that to some degree can, but you still essentially need, but it's not like you can get away by not sleeping enough through the night. If that was the question, no, you need to get proper sleep throughout the night. It's about going through the cycle, right? So
in that case,
sorry, yeah.
Okay, that actually relates to the next question by Ms. Felicia Wong. If one is lack of sleep the night before, what's the best practice to recover? If you don't recommend napping to replace a good night's sleep, so are there any ways to?
No. So for a short time, I mean, we all do it, right? That good. Then you feel tired, taking a nap. But this is again the difference between acute and chronic. So short term, long term. If you last night you went out or you had whatever you had, then yeah, it's good because then there are other factors as well, right? Your body, you need to relax, you need to wind down. It's just that doing it long term, it has negative impacts. But so long term, so short term, I mean, take a nap. I think that we've all done it. It is helpful for other things. Okay. Long term doing it, I don't know. It comes back to that if you're not getting that good sleep, it's for most people, there's no getting around it. It's you can't like cheat and bypass it, basically. At least that's what the data shows.
Okay. All right, let's take one last question again from Ms. Vidya Sinapu. Why someone wake up all of a sudden after a few hours of sleep with open eyes suddenly during sleeping?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so I don't know. They could have. I mean, if they have sleep apnea, if there's a sleep disorder, right? They could be that. It's one thing. If let's say they don't have that. If people suffering from night terrors or children have that, but I don't know if they basically these emotional parts, the amygdala, these areas that play a role in emotion, if those are hyperactivated, that will then, it's kind of like a defense mechanism. Those are triggered that will wake you up. So I don't know if you're talking about someone who's having a really nice sleep and suddenly waking up. I would that would be typically you want to go to the toilet, this kind of stuff. That will like if it's not that, yeah, I don't think there's one. I can't pinpoint one specific reason actually. And if I give someone, and I know we're short of time, but if people have, please feel free to email me, and I can, even if I don't have the answer, I'll look it up. I'm happy to, because these are interesting things also to discuss. Just ping me, just email me.
Okay, all right. We'll get to your email address maybe later after the show. Okay, I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for today. But before we wrap up, let me just ask one question. I know it sounds a bit morbid, but I know that there's also a method to get people to talk, during interrogation, whereby you deprive a person of sleep. Yeah. So what is the worst thing that can happen if you chronically deprive a human being from getting sleep?
So what will happen? So first of all,
you actually die can you die because you're not sleeping properly?
Absolutely. There's this fatal familial sleep syndrome. I think you might have heard about it, but it's a mutation basically, right? And it's fatal, right? Fatal familial insomnia. So it's a mutation that basically leads to buildup of certain proteins, right? In a particular area of the brain called the thalamus. Okay, that's important in sleep, transferring sleep signals. That affect basically what happens is that that those cells are constantly on, and what happens is people, and it's terrible. Basically, it happens very quickly, but you start having problems sleeping, and then within a few weeks, you just can't sleep. Like you can't sleep. And then in the clinical cases, your mental you start aging. You could be 40 years old, 30 years old, and you will be like an 80-year-old or worse. I mean, you won't start looking 80 years old, but I mean, your mental capacities, your ability to walk, move, and then you die. basically your body just can't handle not the sleep. So yes, so and this is basically I mean, there could be other reasons. The mutation could be affecting other brain activity, but it seems like it's just a lack of sleep. So yeah, sleep, and you can sleep deprived. It's happened in some cases where they've sleep deprived for interrogation reports, and people have just died. And people with, that's why sleep deprivation and interrogation like that, people with it, I'll admit to anything. You deprive me of sleep. Okay, so getting information like that is not necessarily the most accurate.
Yeah, I guess people just wonder, like, because it's sleep after all, and some people tend to take this for granted. But okay, apparently from the talk that we've heard today by by Dr. Dipesh, sleep is very, very important. It can literally cause death if chronically dictated. So okay, I think we need to wrap up the talk today. Do you have anything else to add, Dr. Dipesh?
No, please call me Dipesh Festival. No, thank you. I was I'm happy to talk more. I'm sorry I couldn't go into. Anyone's interested in the more biology?
No, it's okay. Yeah, we can leave your email address, and maybe they can contact you directly if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also or other questions. But yeah, no, that's it. So sleep is important. And make sure you get some good sleep. But enjoy life.
Of course. Yeah, that would be the best advice to close out the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Dipesh, for spending some time with us and enlightening us with very useful information, especially among the problem sleepers among us. Now, if you've just logged in, remember that you can always watch the entire session on the Columbia Asia Facebook page. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, in sync with Columbia Asia's tagline, a passion for making people better. We're just as passionate about empowering you with your health as we are with our medical services. So if you'd like to know more about this program, do check out our website at www.columbiaasia.com under Corporate Health Transformation, or you can log on to our Facebook page at Columbia Asia Malaysia under Health Transformation by Columbia Asia. We'll see you again in another episode of this webinar. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
Thank you.